Black people are as privileged as white people. It's just that black privilege happens in the most minute ways, so it goes unnoticed, says this palm color man. Black privilege is a term used by some to argue that black individuals have certain advantages in specific contexts, such as receiving preferential treatment in certain institutions or social scenarios. However, this concept is highly contentious and often misunderstood. It can be used to suggest that black people experience unfair advantages that offset the disadvantages imposed by systemic R to the cyst. And that is to suggest that black people, because of this black privilege that this palm color alleges, they are treated better than palm coloreds are treated. But it's unnoticed because it happens in the smallest ways possible. And in today's video, this palm color person enlightens us on how this happens. But the online community also had something to say about this video. Stick around and find out.
Let's be totally honest. One of the biggest problems in America right now is black privilege. For example, last month in Georgia, a black man shot and killed elderly white people. The town it happened in hadn't seen a single homicide since 2018. And yet, despite all of this, no one really seems to care. The story barely got any national news coverage. But when the races were reversed and a similar incident happened in Florida, there was a national outcry. Or what about when 6 black men attacked and robbed over 100 Asian women in San Francisco? Can you even imagine what would happen if 6 white men did that? Now, amazingly, in San Francisco, 85% of the physical assault crimes involve an Asian victim and a black perpetrator. And that's incredible because black people make up less than 6% of the population there. And yet, for some reason, you'll never hear a Stop Asian Hate activist mention that. They'll blame white supremacy instead. There are literally hundreds of stories like this that you never hear about. Take, for example, James Lee Ramsey. Last year, he was convicted for assaulting an elderly Asian man, and despite the crime, he served less than a year in jail. So he was released from jail, and last month, he assaulted another elderly Asian person, this time an 88-year-old woman. But it's not just the elderly. An Asian high schooler was recently hospitalized after a black classmate stabbed him for fun. A few weeks ago, 6 black kids beat up a 15-year-old white kid for his shoes. Bystanders watched and recorded the whole thing. No one stepped in. This is terrible. Innocent people across America are being attacked, robbed, and even killed, and yet no one seems to really care because the people disproportionately causing it all have a certain skin color. And because everyone is afraid of being called racist, these incidents will just keep happening and nothing will change. The only way things will get better is if we start being honest about what's really going on.
He goes on to mention that there have been numerous attacks done by black people to other races such as white and Asian, but no one says anything because no one wants to be labeled as racist. And while I'm not going to deny or negate that those things do happen and are wrong, let's not pretend that those same things don't occur in other communities, especially those of the kind. For example, this black woman right here by the name of Michelle Peacock was murdered this year by a man. No, not because she did something wrong, but because he thought that she was a man pretending to be a woman. Also this year and more recently, a racist man tried to open fire at an HBCU, but when that didn't work out, he drove to the nearest dollar store and unalived 3 black people. Oh, not because they did something wrong, but just because they were black and he doesn't like black people. And on the topic of historically black colleges, let's also pull out the elephant in the room, how majority of school pews are carried out by people. Not even schools, but also black churches, black businesses, and if you're lucky, you'll be like this guy and get served Burger King after committing a heinous crime. Unlike some of us who aren't so privileged due to our skin color. And what all of those instances have in common is that they rarely got any news coverage, and if they did, they were given some one week and then forgotten about the next week. Meanwhile, we spent a good chunk of the summer obsessing over rich billionaires who spent over $250,000 just to meet their demise at the bottom of the ocean. But what tickles my fanny about this whole thing is the fact that he uses those select few instances of black people committing crimes to label the entire race as privileged. But when black folk do that to the people, we get told that we're crazy, we're wrong, or we're racist. Because you know, it's not good to generalize people, even though he generalized us as people who get to commit crimes and get away with them when that's not the case. And I'm not going to act like he speaks for all people because he doesn't, but there were a lot of people that agree with his sentiment and that concerned me more. So in closing, stop calling people privileged if you can't even call out your own. And stop labeling that as our biggest problem in society if you can't even call out our debt crisis, our housing crisis, the issues going on with our education system, etc. And notice how I had to censor myself throughout majority of this video video because unfortunately my privilege doesn't allow me to say certain words that might trigger you, otherwise I'll get banned.
It's weird to me that he would say one of the biggest problems in America right there, just because it's like, if you're gonna say some crazy sensational ish online, why are you thinking small? What could possibly be number one on your list if it's not black privilege? Is it what, the libs spiking the national debt, spending $8 on bisexual coffee? Is it figuring out a way to stop De'Aaron Fox in the clutch?
Are we delusional? Black privilege? Here we go. Oh my god. Well, perchance, is there context surrounding both events that explains why the former wasn't described as an act of black supremacy?
The first one doesn't seem like a targeted attack because the dude literally lived there. Like he was neighbors with all of the victims.
And you might say, well, you don't know if the one in Jacksonville was racially motivated.
This was racially motivated and black people, according to Jacksonville Sheriff T.K. Waters.
You might say, well, how on earth could you know that?
Well, apparently right before shooting, he texted his father to check his computer, where his father found manifestos. Very specifically went to a Dollar General right next to a historically black school.
Also, by the way, I don't know if you know this,
There are a lot of mass shootings in the United States. Most of them do not make national news.
wow, that's crazy. Yeah, I wonder what would happen.
I bet they'd get arrested and charged with hate crimes. I bet the governor of the state would immediately hold a press conference in that city about hate crimes against that community. I bet at least one of them would be facing up to 95 years in prison.
Side note, if you're about to argue that this would result in some sort of national outcry if these were 6 white men, I would like you to please name me one robbery. Any robbery. Unless you kill someone or steal the Mona Lisa, robberies do not make national headlines or result in public outcry. So I'd like to know what exactly would be happening to those 6 white men that are not happening to these 6 black men. Daniel, I've responded to you a few times on this app, and you have a habit of using sources that directly contradict you, but this is the very first time that you are contradicted not by the source, but by the blurb that you put over your face.
This does not say 85% of all physical crimes. This says that in a 2008 survey by the police department in which they analyzed 300 strong-arm robberies, 85% of the physical assault crimes in these strong-arm robberies, the victims were Asians and the perpetrators were African American.
A strong-arm robbery is what it sounds like. It's like snatching an iPhone out of somebody's hand and running away. So we're looking at a very specific crime, robberies, and then a very specific subset of that crime, strong-arm robberies, so not armed robberies, and then an extremely specific subset of that, because we're only looking at 300 of them, and then an even more specific subset of that because we're only looking at those robberies that resulted in physical assault crimes, because a robbery by itself is not assault. Which means we are looking at a subset of a subset of a subset of one specific crime. And this is a very fun thing in statistics. Sometimes if you look at hyper-specific categories,
You find some very odd patterns that are very clearly coincidences, like the age of Miss America title holders compared to the murder by steam, hot vapor, or other hot objects.
but none of that even really matters because, by the way, this study doesn't even exist.
Here's the article on sfgate.com that mentions it. This survey is completely unnamed. It is not cited in any way, shape, or form. In looking for this survey, the only thing that comes up is this article that mentions it and other people referencing that news article.
There is no way to find out what robberies they were looking at, which precinct was doing this survey to begin with, or if this even happened, because this information, even if it exists, is not public.
I really doubt this statistic is legitimate because it seems to directly contradict the Bureau of Justice statistics, which says that out of the 829,000 violent crimes against Asian Americans, 191,000 of them were by black perpetrators, which is a lot less than 75%. Secondly, San Francisco Police Department does not keep race data on its victims or on its perpetrators. It's nowhere in any of their crime dashboards.
You know what, let's give the benefit of the doubt and assume that this statistic is completely accurate, even though it definitely isn't, and try to ask ourselves, why would it be that such a high percentage of the perpetrators against Asian victims would be African American? First, let's look at the nature of the crime itself, a strong-arm robbery, where you're using your physical strength to steal an object off of somebody's person. This requires that, 1, you are able to overpower and outrun your victim because you do not have a weapon, and 2, that you do not have anything specifically in mind. You're not robbing a store, you're just taking whatever it is they have in their pockets. The latter shows that this is very clearly not a crime of passion. This is a crime of poverty, which means individuals that are more likely to experience poverty will be more likely to commit these very specific crimes. The nature of the crime itself also means that you're going to be more likely to target someone that you are more confident you are able to overpower or outrun, like the weak or the elderly. So a race with a large senior population will be more likely to be targeted. And crimes of poverty poverty are also crimes of proximity, because it's difficult to travel long distances. So you're most likely going to be committing these crimes to people that are near you. And in quite a lot of urban centers, Asian communities and black communities are right next to each other, if not in the same place.
Right here is Chinatown and Two Bridges, the two largest Asian population centers in Manhattan. If you take a look at the map of the housing projects in New York City, 90% of the residents of whom are black or Hispanic, you'll notice that the largest chunk are here in Harlem, but the next largest bundle are right down here, right next to Chinatown and Two Bridges.
And if you live in New York City, you know that Chinatown is also a lot of old people. If you pass any park in Chinatown at say 8 in the morning, you will see 100 different old Chinese women doing aerobics. I always want to join in. They're like 80 years old and they have so many friends. All these things together make it seem a lot more likely that we'd end up with a statistic like this. Now granted, I'm not as familiar with San Francisco as I am New York.
However, if this is Chinatown over here, and if this is a map of the public housing in San Francisco, it does look very similar. If this specific statistic from niche.com is correct, that means 25% of San Francisco's Chinatown is above the age of 65, which actually makes them the largest age cohort.
But obviously the thing this guy is trying to imply here is that black people hate Asian people. So let's even give him the fact that there might be animosity between these two groups. Now let's try to ask ourselves, why might it be that this animosity exists? I would wager that a large contributing factor to this would be the fact that quite a lot of white people will use Asian people as a way to dismiss black people's struggles. White people love pointing at Asian people and going, look, see, they made it, they're successful, therefore all the things that you're going through are actually just your fault.
If there's white privilege, then there has to be Asian privilege, because Asians make more money than whites.
And if you keep doing this, obviously it's going to build animosity between these two groups, which means that the solution to this animosity would be, one, not scapegoating Asians as a way to deflect from real-world issues, and two, trying to improve the material conditions of black people so there isn't this disparity to begin with. But you didn't do either of those two things. You just made a 2-minute TikTok in which you just showed a bunch of different news articles and basically said, wow, these black people need to be stopped. Do we understand how that's not gonna help? I'm sorry, you're making a video about black privilege and you bring up the length of a prison sentence?
You have to know that black people on average receive longer sentences than white perpetrators. On average, 19% longer, according to the United States Sentencing Commission, who go on to say that violence in an offender's criminal history does not appear to account for any of the demographic differences in sentencing. You found like one guy and were like, wow, this sentence doesn't seem that long, and thought that like undid the mountains of evidence that show this disparity? This also isn't even that crazy. It was an assault charge, he pled guilty, he was sentenced to 3 years, and then yeah, was released on probation about a year later. That's really not that uncommon. Alright, so this is the point of the video where he clearly just Googled black crime and found every news article he could from the past 2 years in which a black person did something. This is not an argument.
A few weeks ago, 6 black kids beat up a 15-year-old white kid for his shoes. Bystanders watched and recorded the whole thing, and no one stepped in.
Do you think this is unique to black people doing something? This is like a documented thing.
It's called the bystander effect, where the larger the group is, the less people actually become to actually do anything. Because if a single individual has to do something, then the sense of responsibility will be strong. But if a group of people are asked together, then each individual in the group will have a weak sense of responsibility.
I made a whole TV show about this. By the way, I guess while we're talking about bystanders and viewing black or white perpetrators, look, Daniel, I once responded to a guy on this app that said black people were biologically criminals. You're not there, but you're getting really close.
So, Yuval, this guy's not just delusional, he's the most racist content creator that posts, like, not even dog whistles on this app. He, like, this Daniel guy posts, I stitched one of his videos, like, half a year ago. The video I stitched of this Daniel guy about a half a year ago was of him pulling up one of the least populated, most rural towns in America and saying that because their crime rate was so incredibly low compared to a place like Atlanta, one of the most populated cities in the US, that the reason that rural place has such a low crime rate is because it has like a 97% white population. And that was just his entire video. Had hundreds of thousands of likes on it, and people in the comment section agreeing. But like, if you want to find racist in this app, check that man's followers.
And from those few videos, now you can tell that black privilege is not a thing. It doesn't happen. So this palm color person just made up that content because he knows that it resonates better with palm coloreds who are privileged and are to desist. right? Just think of political leaders that use this narrative to rally supporters behind them, right? They become racially segregatory towards black people so that palm coloreds can vote for them and put them in office. Now, racial privilege refers to the advantages and benefits that individuals receive solely based on their racial background. It is important to note that racial privilege does not imply that all members of a particular racial group automatically enjoy these benefits, nor does it mean that individuals without racial privilege do not experience hardships or challenges. The term black privilege is not a commonly recognized concept or widely accepted in discussions about racial issues. Yeah, because it's not real, like we've seen in today's video. It is not part of mainstream discourse or academic scholarship. The concept of privilege generally refers to unearned advantages or benefits that certain groups enjoy based on their socio-economic and cultural attributes. But black people, do they enjoy that? Like black people all over the world, unless if they're in Africa, like in African countries, yeah, we do see some privilege in that context, but not in the American diaspora. And I'm not saying that in a provocative way or anything. I just mean that as Africans, we messed Africa up by our bad leadership. Historically, discussions around privilege have focused on systems and structures that grant advantages to certain racial or ethnic groups, such as palm color privilege, which refers to the societal advantages that palm color people often experience as a result of their skin color. These advantages can include greater access to education, employment opportunities, housing, and protection from discrimination. But palm colors enjoy this privilege and it goes unnoticed because they were born in it, right? It's ingrained in them, which also results in racial discrimination that they do not also get accounted for. The idea of black privilege is sometimes used by individuals who seek to downplay or dismiss discussions about systemic racism and the experiences of marginalized communities. It is often framed as a response to claims of palm color privilege as a way to highlight perceived advantages that some individuals within the black community may have, such as affirmative action policies or diversity initiatives. I heard that affirmative action is no longer a thing, and even in instances where it was a thing, we've seen scenarios where black people will be downplayed or sidelined and palm colors will get that same affirmative action. In fact, there are speculations that affirmative action was issued for palm color women, not really black people or black women. No, it was for palm color women. So in the first place, black people are never entitled or privileged in any way because all the laws and rules and regulations do not consider them first, right? They consider palm colors. Some palm color individuals may use the term black privilege to express frustration with perceived preferential treatment or affirmative action policies. They might believe that such measures unfairly benefit black individuals at their expense. This viewpoint, however, often fails to account for the broader systemic issues in the historical context of racial inequality, the racial inequality that black people have faced. This simple affirmative action that wasn't created or intended for them in the first place has served them in some small amount of time, right? And at the same time, you want to say that black people are privileged, even though this rule or law wasn't created for them. In conclusion, the notion that black individuals are privileged often overlooks these systemic issues and can be used to deflect from discussions about racial inequality. Understanding privileges requires acknowledging historical and ongoing disparities and recognizing that certain advantages, such as those afforded to palm color individuals, are not equally distributed across different racial groups. Just look at what is happening in the Congo right now in Africa. No palm color leader is talking about it and nobody want to step into the scene to help out. Why? Because it's the blacks that are suffering. But if it was happening to palm colors will step right in. Just take a look at what is happening in Israel against the Palestinians. Why isn't anybody doing anything reasonable to help the Palestinians? Because they are getting oppressed by palm colors. Right? It's an entitlement that palm colors uphold worldwide. So, does black privilege exist even after this discussion? You leave your thoughts in the comments and tell us what you think, because we never know. Maybe a palm color man out there was watching our discussion and they argue. I'll see you in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe. Signing off and take care.